Hello and welcome to my channel. Here I tell interesting stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
The land of Corinth shimmered under the noon sun. The hills rolled gently, covered in vineyards and olive groves. At its heart stood the great city, its white stone walls and towers glinting on the horizon. Even in these peaceful times, the city bustled with life. At the highest point of the city, above all else, stood the palace. It was a place of marble columns and golden decorations. Inside those grand halls lived Sisyphus, king of Corinth, a man as clever as he was proud. Sisyphus stood by his window, his sharp eyes watching farmers till their fields far below. Even now, as a gentle breeze played through the open window, his mind was restless, hungry for news, secrets, and control. For Sisyphus, life was a game, and he always wanted to win. From a young age, Sisyphus had been different. He was not the strongest who picked up a sword, and he was not the bravest who rode into battle, but he was clever, perhaps too clever for the gods' liking. He had a way of seeing patterns, of understanding what others missed, but with his great mind came great pride. Sisyphus believed none could match him, not even the gods. One evening, after a feast lit by thousands of torches and filled with laughter and wine, Sisyphus was called aside by one of his most trusted advisors, Mentor. "Your Majesty," Mentor whispered, his voice smooth and shadowy, "the king of the neighboring land seeks war. He plots in secret, gathering allies and weapons." Sisyphus smiled thinly. "Let him plot. We have spies everywhere, and if he dares attack us, he will fail." Mentor hesitated, glancing left and right. "But, my king, the gods themselves may be watching. Your enemies are not only of flesh and blood. The gods envy those who are too clever." Sisyphus laughed, a deep, confident sound. "The gods? I fear no god. If they watch me, let them. I will outsmart them as I outsmart all." That night, as Sisyphus lay in bed, his thoughts wandered from Mentor's warning. He knew stories of men punished for challenging the gods, tales whispered to frighten children, but he could not imagine himself, Sisyphus, bowing before anyone. Days passed, and Sisyphus's spies brought him word of every plot, every secret meeting, every danger. No enemy could surprise Corinth, not while Sisyphus ruled. But Sisyphus's greatest secret was his own pride. He did not realize he was being watched more closely than anyone in Corinth. For up on Mount Olympus, Zeus, king of the gods, had grown restless. He watched Sisyphus's constant scheming and boasting with growing irritation. "He thinks himself above all," Zeus said to his brother Hades, lord of the underworld. "We must remind Sisyphus that his power is nothing compared to ours." Hades grinned. He enjoyed seeing mortals punished for their arrogance, especially those who thought themselves clever enough to cheat death. But Zeus was a god of patience, and he waited for Sisyphus to make a mistake. One day, the river god Sisyphus came to Sisyphus desperate for help. His beloved daughter Aegina had vanished. He suspected a god's hand in her disappearance. "Sisyphus, wise king, do you know where my daughter has gone? Have you heard any rumor or tale?" Sisyphus pleaded. Sisyphus saw an opportunity. He knew the truth, that Zeus himself had taken Aegina, but secrets were valuable, and Sisyphus never gave anything without gaining something in return. "I might know something," Sisyphus answered slyly, "but I am a king with many needs. The people of Corinth are thirsty. If you would grant us a spring, for water, for life, then perhaps I will remember where your daughter has gone." Sisyphus, desperate, agreed. With a sweep of his mighty trident, he struck the stones of the Acropolis, and a crystal spring poured forth. Satisfied, Sisyphus leaned forward and whispered the secret. Zeus has taken your daughter, Aegina. He flew away with her as an eagle to the island of Oinon. If you hurry, you may catch him in the act. Asopus, eyes blazing with gratitude and rage, rushed away. And in that same moment, high upon Olympus, Zeus's anger grew. Sisyphus had dared meddle in divine affairs. He had used a god's pain for his own gain. It was a line mortals were never meant to cross. That night, as thunder rumbled over Corinth, a cold fear entered Sisyphus's heart, but he pushed it away. The spring brought new prosperity to his people. The citizens cheered his wisdom, believing their king a man favored above all others. But the gods did not forget. A few weeks later, as Sisyphus walked the palace gardens, a strange chill filled the air. The birds fell silent. The leaves stilled. In the shadows, a figure appeared, a presence darker than midnight, skin like shining onyx, eyes like burning coals. Sisyphus, the figure intoned, your time has come. Sisyphus faced death itself. Thanatos, the god of death, rarely left the underworld. He moved silently, with a dignity that made even kings tremble. But not Sisyphus. Thanatos, Sisyphus said, lifting his chin, I thought you never visited mortals in person. To what do I owe the honor? Thanatos's expression did not change. You have angered the Olympians. Your pride exceeds all. Zeus sends me to take you to your fate. Simply like that, Sisyphus's heart should have stopped. Death should have wrapped him in its cold embrace. But pride had made Sisyphus bold and clever. He looked at Thanatos and he thought, can I trick even death itself? I see, Sisyphus said, feigning sorrow. Please allow me a moment to say goodbye to my family. My son will need your guidance in ruling. Come, let us drink and honor your presence before you take me below. Thanatos paused. Sisyphus poured them both wine, watching Thanatos with sly eyes. They sat together, the mortal and the god, drinking as the sun set. Sisyphus asked Thanatos about the underworld, the journey beyond. Thanatos, unused to conversation, grew comfortable, letting down his guard. Sisyphus listened carefully, then suddenly sprang from his seat. Let me show you something, mighty Thanatos, a marvel I have built in my chambers. It is a new chain, the strongest in the world. Not even the gods could break it. Thanatos, curious, followed. Sisyphus led him into a dark room where the thick iron chains gleamed. Would you try it? Sisyphus asked innocently. Show me if death could escape. Thanatos smiled, a cruel smile, and stepped forward. No chain can bind death. But as soon as Thanatos slipped the chain around his wrist, Sisyphus snapped the lock. The chain tightened, growing tighter and tighter. Thanatos struggled, but the chain held firm. Sisyphus had done the impossible. He had chained death itself. Instantly, the world changed. Across the earth, men and animals stopped dying. The old, the wounded, the sick, all clung to life. The priests of every temple realized something was wrong. Even in the deep blackness of the underworld, the shades grew restless, waiting for new souls that never came. The gods were furious. Sisyphus has gone too far, Hades thundered. The natural order is broken. Zeus's face twisted with rage. We must free Thanatos. Send Ares, god of war. He will not be so easily fooled. Ares descended upon Corinth in a streak of red fire. He stormed the palace, sword flashing, armor blazing. Sisyphus's guards fell aside like leaves in the wind. When he reached the secret chamber, Ares broke the chains with one mighty blow. Thanatos, free at last, turned to Sisyphus with cold fury. Your cleverness ends now. They dragged Sisyphus down, down, through shadowed corridors, past the boundaries of earth and sky, into the mists of the underworld. Yet even then, Sisyphus was not done scheming. At the river Styx, he pleaded for one last favor. "Hades, great lord, will you permit me to say farewell to my wife? I fear she will not give me the proper burial. Let me return to tell her." Surprisingly, Hades agreed, thinking Sisyphus would return obediently. But as soon as Sisyphus tasted the air of earth, he ran, laughing. He returned to his palace, kissed his wife, and resumed his life as king, as if nothing had happened. The gods stared in disbelief. "He must be punished," Zeus declared. "He defies us all, again and again." This time there would be no escape. But Sisyphus had changed. Though he still wore his crown and walked with pride, doubt crept in. At night he dreamed of chains, of dark rivers, of being watched by eyes he could never escape. One evening, as a storm gathered over Corinth, Mentor joined Sisyphus on the palace roof. "You have cheated death, my king. Few men can say that." Sisyphus sighed. "I did what I must for the sake of Corinth." Mentor studied him, "Or for your own pride?" Sisyphus did not answer. In the distance, thunder rumbled, long and low, like angry gods speaking secrets in the sky. The story was not over. It was, in truth, just beginning. And Sisyphus, for all his cleverness, could not foresee what punishment the gods had prepared for him. The days passed slowly, each filled with a strange, restless energy. Sisyphus walked the halls of his palace with a mind heavy as stone, unsure if he should fear the gods' wrath or mock it. He had, after all, defied and tricked them twice. Each day, the people of Corinth looked at their king with wonder. Many whispered that Sisyphus must be blessed, for not even death could claim him. But some feared that the gods were merely waiting to strike. Sisyphus, though ever outwardly confident, for the first time in his life, began to wonder if his pride had taken him too far. He spent long nights pacing his tower, staring at the stars, seeking meaning in their cold, distant beauty. In those moments, he thought of his family, his people, and of destiny. Yet still, he told himself, there is no puzzle I cannot solve, no trap I cannot escape. Even the gods can be fooled. Pride in his mind was strength. But the world outside had changed. The priests in the temples warned of omens, birds falling silent, strange storms gathering out of nowhere, shadows moving where none should be. Sisyphus ignored them. He had survived too much to believe in simple portents. One night, as he sat alone in his study, Mentor entered quietly. He brought with him an uneasy hush. "My king," Mentor said, "I have seen signs. The stars themselves tremble. The prophets speak of great punishment." Sisyphus looked up from his scrolls. "You worry too much, old friend." Mentor shook his head. "There are limits, even for kings. The gods, they may forgive many things, but not pride without measure. Remember Prometheus. Remember Niobe. All who thought themselves above divine law paid dearly. Will you not humble yourself?" Sisyphus smiled, but it was a tired smile. If the gods wanted obedience alone, they should have made us sheep. The difference between men and animals is mind, the will to shape our world, even to challenge the heavens. Mentor bowed and left, yet his words echoed in the stone chamber. That storm-racked night, as Sisyphus was about to retire, a new presence appeared at his door. This presence was neither shadow nor substance, but something between. A whisper in the air, a sudden chill that pressed against his skin. Sisyphus stiffened. "Come out and face me, whatever you are. No spirit or wraith will frighten the king of Corinth." From the corner of the room, a figure emerged, cloaked in black. Sisyphus recognized him instantly. Hermes, messenger of the gods. Unlike the fearsome Hades or the war-bright Ares, Hermes carried a quiet menace, a sharp wit behind his sly smile. "Hail, King Sisyphus," Hermes said with a mocking bow. "Zeus sends greetings and summons." Sisyphus rose to his full height, trying not to show his fear. "If the gods wish to speak with me, why do they not come themselves? Must even Zeus hide behind messengers?" Hermes' eyes glinted, arrogant as ever. "This is no invitation. This is a command." Sisyphus's mouth twisted, but he knew he could not refuse. The room seemed to grow cold. The shadows deepened about his feet. Hermes beckoned. "Come, King, time to meet your destiny." With a single touch, the air around them quivered, and the world dissolved into starlight. They fell through blackness, silent as the grave, cold as regret. Sisyphus tumbled into a vision of his life. Victories, feasts, secret deals, the faces of those he had outwitted. Now he wondered, was he falling to judgment or just another puzzle to solve? They landed on the slopes of a great gray mountain under a sky eternally dark. Ghostly trees waved their moon-pale limbs, and the air bore the tang of iron and sorrow. At the foot of the mountain waited Zeus himself. His eyes were storms, his voice the thunder. Hades stood beside him, silent and severe. The other gods gathered like judges. Athena, cold and wise, Hera, regal and accusing, Apollo shining with truth. Only Hermes remained at Sisyphus's side, his smile hidden now. Sisyphus squared his shoulders, refusing to kneel. "You have summoned me, O gods. I am here. What charge do you bring?" The ground shook with Zeus's anger. "You have insulted the divine order. You have meddled in matters beyond mortals. You tricked death, gossiped of our affairs, and have shown nothing but pride in the face of warning." Sisyphus met his gaze. "Is pride not the gift you gave men? You made us to strive, to reach, to hope. If I reach farther, who is to blame?" Hades' eyes were cold. "There are boundaries. Even mortals must respect death." Sisyphus shrugged. "If death can be tricked, perhaps it deserves to be." Athena spoke, her voice colder than the river Styx. "Your mind is a shining thing, Sisyphus, but without wisdom, brilliance becomes danger. For your arrogance and your crimes, you must be punished." Sisyphus stood silent, listening. Zeus raised his hand. "Hear your sentence. You, Sisyphus, will dwell in the land of shadows. Your task will be endless, a contest that you cannot win, a burden that cannot be laid down. Upon this mountain you shall labor eternally, so that you may finally learn humility." In a clap of thunder, the gods vanished. Sisyphus was left with only Hermes and the wind. Hermes turned to him, eyes flaming with something like pity or contempt. "You gambled with fate, Sisyphus. Here is the price." He gestured up the endless gray slope. At the base of the mountain lay a rock, monstrous and round, slick as ice and heavy as guilt itself. "Your task is simple," Hermes remarked with cruel gentleness. "You must roll this stone to the very summit. Only when it stands at the peak will your labor cease. Roll it, and you may rest." Sisyphus eyed the stone. "Very well," he said. "If this is my punishment, I will face it as I have everything else, with wit and will." Hermes only smiled and faded away. Sisyphus put his shoulder to the stone. It was heavier than anything he had ever lifted. His feet slipped in the black sand and his muscles burned. But Sisyphus was strong. He dug deep within himself, a place of pride, rage, and the memory of every trick he'd played on gods and men alike. Inch by inch, he forced the stone up the slope. The ground grew steeper, the wind colder. All around him, the land was silent. No tree, no stream, no bird broke the emptiness. There was only the stone, the mountain, and Sisyphus. Climbing, straining, never stopping, he forced the boulder upward. Sweat poured down his brow, blood from his torn hands painted the rock. But victory was within sight. The peak shone faintly, like a promise. At last, his legs trembling, Sisyphus heaved the rock onto the summit's very lip. He straightened, heart pounding. For the first time in eternity, he felt the old thrill, a puzzle solved, a victory achieved. Then, with evil cunning, the stone shuddered, balanced for one shuddering heartbeat, and impossibly slipped free. It rolled down the mountain, gathering speed, until it crashed back to its starting place. The sound echoed forever. Sisyphus let out an anguished cry, all his hard labor erased in an instant. He staggered down, each step filled with the memory of failure. Yet as he drew near the rock, it was unchanged, waiting for him as if nothing had happened. A whisper echoed in his mind, as if Hermes still stood at his side. "Only when you give up your pride will your punishment end." Sisyphus spat in the dust. "Never," he roared. "I will outlast this mountain, this stone, even the gods themselves." He set his shoulder to the rock once more, and so the cycle began. Day after endless day, Sisyphus strained and struggled, always pushing the stone upward, always losing it at the very brink. Each time his hope flared, it was shattered. Yet he would not submit. Between struggles, Sisyphus thought. He remembered his palace, the olive groves of Corinth, the laughter of his wife, the wise words of Mentor. Why did I never listen? What am I now? He tried to trick the stone, wedging it with loose rocks, chipping away to make it lighter, even stopping to rest and hope for some sign from the gods. But the stone always betrayed him, slipping from his grasp in fresh and unpredictable ways, down and down into failure. He even called out to the gods for mercy. For weeks he shouted, "I have learned. Is this not enough?" But the only answer was the eternal wind, the silent mountain. In the moments when the stone was at rest, Sisyphus wept, not for himself, but for his pride, the endless hunger that had driven him to this fate. Yet in the deepest part of himself, Sisyphus refused to surrender. "No god can break my will," he told himself. "If this punishment is endless, then so is my strength." The years twisted past. Sisyphus no longer counted them. His hands grew hard as the stone, his eyes keen as storms. He began to talk to the stone, cursing it, bargaining with it, even begging. He imagined Mentor at his side, urging him on, whispering, "Why do you persist, Sisyphus? What are you seeking?" Sisyphus answered, "To win, to cheat the gods once more, to prove that I am more than a pawn in their game." But the words rang hollow in the emptiness. One day, as Sisyphus pressed the stone higher and higher, he looked back. Below, in the mists, he saw shapes, other souls, watching, whispering, their faces blurred with sadness. One called up to him, "Why do you suffer so, king?" Sisyphus answered, "Because the gods commanded it." The soul replied, "Is this pride or punishment?" Sisyphus threw his weight against the stone, refusing to respond further. Yet over time he realized that the pain had changed him. The first weeks, his mind was sharp with rebellion. The first years he clung to hope that some cleverness might free him. By the 100th year he worked silently, his thoughts turned inward. He began to remember not his victories, but those he had hurt through his pride. The neighbor tricked into loss, the friend embarrassed for sport, the wife kept always at arm's length, and mentor, wise mentor, whose warnings had been scorned. At the peak, each time he reached it and the stone slipped away, Sisyphus saw, brief and clear, the truth. There were things pride could never win back. Still, he worked. He refused surrender. The mountain became his entire world, the climb, the push, the inevitable defeat. One night, as he sat exhausted at the base of the mountain, someone appeared beside him. A woman, her face both familiar and replete with compassion. He stared in wonder. Mother? It was his mother or her spirit. He could not tell. She spoke softly. My son, why do you refuse humility? Sisyphus looked away. I cannot give the gods the satisfaction. I would rather suffer forever than bow. She touched his head. Is true strength not found in knowing when to bow, to accept limits? Pride may build kingdoms, but only wisdom keeps them. Before he could answer, she faded. Sisyphus put his hand to the stone once more. For the first time, he did not curse it, nor shout, nor bargain. He simply pushed, silent and alone. As the eons stretched onward, Sisyphus's pride burned bright. But sometimes, just sometimes, he listened to the quiet voices in his mind. He realized the punishment was not for failing the gods, but for failing himself, for believing he was above the wisdom of humility, for thinking he could shape destiny and truth only by his will. And still, the mountain waited. The stone waited. Sisyphus too waited, for meaning, for release, or for the moment when pride, at last, gave way. At the heart of punishment is memory. For Sisyphus, the endless days blurred together. One push, one struggle, one lost boulder after another. But his mind was never still. His past would not die. Those memories followed him as closely as his shadow beneath the sickly silver sky, whispering to him at every failure, every nightfall, every dawn that brought the stone again to his feet. He lived now by the rhythm of struggle and short, restless pauses. Each day began the same. Sisyphus rose from the hard ground, the only comfort the strength his body had gained from repetition. He would glance down the slope to where the boulder sat like a quiet beast waiting to be tamed, and he would taste bitterness, but also something like resolve. Then he would put his whole being into the simple, terrible act of pushing the stone up the mountain. But as the years curled like smoke around him, Sisyphus began to see and hear things he had long forgotten. Sometimes, in the cracks between day and night, when the sky softened to gray and the wind stirred the dry earth strangely, he saw familiar faces in the gloom that lay beyond the slopes. At first, he thought them tricks of his mind, but as time went on, their appearances grew more solid, more insistent. The first was Mentor. His old advisor's spirit shimmered at the edge of his vision as he shouldered the boulder up the flank of the mountain. Mentor's eyes were gentle, but sad, and he watched the king with a look that spoke of patience and pain. It is a hard thing to be clever and proud, my king, Mentor said one day, as Sisyphus paused, gasping, hair plastered to his brow with sweat. But a hard thing is not always the right thing. Sisyphus let the stone rest for a moment and stared into the clouded, shifting air. Do the gods send you to torment me? Or is this my punishment alone, to be haunted by memories as well as by labor? Mentor smiled, his shape flickering. You are haunted because you still hope, Sisyphus. You carry regret deeper than you admit. Do you not sometimes wish that you had listened, that you had chosen humility even once. Sisyphus's throat tightened. No, I cannot regret refusing obedience. My spirit was made to stand tall, not to bend to the wind. But wind shapes mountains, Mentor said, sorrowful. Even the hardest stone yields, in time, to gentleness and patience. Sisyphus looked away. He pressed on, muscles burning, hands torn, but cannot forget Mentor's words. As he rolled the stone, he thought of all the moments where pride had closed his ears to counsel. Pride had made him blind to others' pain. Pride had convinced him that cleverness alone could win the gods' favor. As the days turned to years, others came to walk the slopes and shadows near him. Sisyphus saw the faces of those he loved, his wife, her eyes bright with tears, his children, grown old in his absence, the friends whose trust he had broken for some fleeting victory in the cruel games of court. One night, exhausted and alone, he collapsed beside the boulder at the base of the mountain, weeping softly in the cold darkness. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. He looked up and saw his wife, a vision of grace, sadness, and memory. "Why do you fight so hard?" she asked, voice soft as a lullaby. "What is at the peak of this mountain that you cannot find within your own heart?" He struggled against the tears. "If I reach the top, even just once, maybe they will let me go. Maybe I will be free." She smoothed his hair. "Will you truly be free if you win by pride alone? What will remain of you then?" Sisyphus clung to her ghostly hand. I wish I had known." "You still can know," she whispered. Her form dissolved like mist as the light grew. Each time the boulder slipped from his grip and crashed to the bottom, Sisyphus would stand still and listen for her voice, though it came less often. The weight of those memories, regrets, and losses grew heavier than the stone. He began, timidly at first, to help those ghosts as they appeared, lifting their burdens in dreams, listening to their silent pain, sharing what small strength he had. He realized the stone was not his only burden. The pride that had once seemed like armor now felt like another, rougher rock at his back. One endless day bled into another. On a morning when the dew clung to the earth like hope refusing to let go, a new visitor came. A stranger dressed in rags, limping up the mountain's lowest slopes. The stranger's hair was gray as storm clouds, and his cane thumped softly with every step. Sisyphus frowned. He was used to visions, but not to newcomers. "Who are you?" he called, voice hoarse. The man stopped and smiled a strange, crooked smile. "A fellow traveler, perhaps, or perhaps a teacher, if you need one." Sisyphus waited, silent, measuring the stranger's words. The stranger lowered himself on a flat stone, setting his cane beside him. "You have worked hard, King Sisyphus, harder than you could have imagined. But you must learn one more lesson. The hardest battle is not against the gods or the rock. It is against yourself." Sisyphus bristled. "Enough riddles. Speak plainly if you have wisdom worth sharing." The stranger laughed, the sound full of gentle mockery. "Very well. You have always believed that your punishment was to roll the stone, and so you have fought it, fought the gods, fought fate, fought everything except your own spirit. But what if you accepted the task, not as a punishment, but as a simple part of being? Could you then find peace?" Sisyphus shook his head. "Peace is a lie. The gods play with mortals for their own amusement." The stranger shrugged. "Or perhaps they give mortals the gift of learning, of changing. To accept one's flaws, to forgive one's errors, this too is a kind of victory. One not won by outsmarting, but by understanding." Sisyphus laughed bitterly. What does forgiveness buy me in this place? The stranger rose, picking up his cane. Perhaps nothing here, or perhaps everything. And he walked away, vanishing into mist. Sisyphus pondered the words each night. The next time his wife's spirit appeared, she did not try to comfort him. She only watched as he struggled, her gaze steady. "What would you have me do?" Sisyphus cried. "Give up? Bow to the gods who mock and torment me?" She shook her head. No, not bowing, not surrendering, but understanding that pain does not always mean defeat. Sometimes it gives life new shape. The words echoed in his heart. That day, for the first time, Sisyphus did not curse the gods, nor cry in rage when the boulder slipped from his hands and thundered down the slope. He simply watched it go, then wiped the sweat from his brow, and began again. With each slow climb, Sisyphus reflected. He saw that every victory in his life had truly been fleeting, that pride had often left him alone at the summit, while humility might have brought him connection, comfort, or understanding. He realized, as the stranger had said, that the battle was not against fate, but against his own refusal to accept himself and his flaws. He saw that others had loved him, not for his tricks or victories, but for his presence, his laughter, even in rare quiet moments when he listened rather than spoke. Time changed for Sisyphus. The stone became familiar, less an enemy than a teacher. Its rough surface was worn smooth by his hands. The mountain, once a field of punishment, became a world of challenge. Yes, but not of only torment. He found that he could sing as he labored. Sometimes he whispered apologies into the wind. For Mentor, for his wife, for those he had wronged. He did not know if the gods heard, but it mattered less. The words were for him. It happened one day, without warning, that the sky grew clear and cool rain fell on the mountain for the first time in memory. Sisyphus stood in the open, arms wide, letting the clean water wash the sweat and dust from his face. He laughed, a sound rusty with disuse, and for a moment he felt lighter than he had in centuries. From the shadows, the stranger returned. "Have you found peace?" he asked. Sisyphus shrugged. "No, not peace, not yet, but I have found understanding." The stranger smiled. "Then you are nearer to freedom than you know, Sisyphus. Freedom is not the end of labor, but the end of hatred for that labor, accepting that our struggles shape us, whether given by gods or by our own nature." Sisyphus nodded. "Perhaps that is the lesson I never learned, in life or death." The stranger laid a hand on Sisyphus's shoulder. "There is one more thing. Forgive yourself." Sisyphus's chest ached. Forgiveness? For so much pride, so many wounds given and received, so many wasted years. Could he? That night, as Sisyphus slept, he dreamed of Corinth, bright fields and singing, Mentor's counsel, his wife, and children's laughter. He did not dream of thrones or victories, but of warm bread, sun on his face, the quiet moments shared with others. In the gray dawn, before taking up his stone yet again, Sisyphus knelt beside it and whispered, "Gods, if any listen, I have erred. I know it now. Let this lesson bind itself to my soul. I will not forget, even if I roll the stone forever." As he pushed the stone that day, his hands bled less. His heart felt less heavy. He found that when he stumbled, the mountain itself seemed to offer a little less resistance. And still, the boulder rolled back each time, yet it no longer felt like pure loss. One dusk, as the mountain glowed gold with the last rays of sun, Mentor's spirit appeared for the last time. "I am proud of you, Sisyphus," he said. "Real pride is not in never falling, but in rising after every fall and learning anew." Sisyphus smiled. "Thank you, old friend. I wish I had listened sooner." Mentor faded, peace in his gentle eyes, and still Sisyphus worked. He never knew if the gods would tire of his punishment, if Zeus would offer mercy, if the stone would ever remain at the top. But he had learned at last that victory was not always what he thought. In struggle, he had found humility. In humility, a strange, gritty joy. He continued his endless task, yet the mountain was less lonely, the stone less cruel, and his own heart no longer felt like a cage. The shadows of pride still lingered, but Sisyphus bore them with patience, each day shaping the man he was always meant to become. There is a moment in every long struggle when a person faces the truth of their own endurance. For Sisyphus, that moment did not come with thunder or visions, but in a single gray dawn when he awoke and did not immediately curse his fate. The mountain, the cold wind, the endless boulder, all seemed strangely familiar now, like companions instead of tormentors. He rose, stretched sore limbs, and went to the boulder. He ran his hands over its surface, feeling every scar. Sisyphus wondered, would I feel strange if freed? Is this stone more part of me now than my own memories were in life? The thought unsettled him, yet also brought a quiet pride. Rolling the boulder upward had become a kind of meditation. He found patterns in the mountain's slope, where the sand softened, where tiny ledges helped him gain a foothold, where the wind shielded or resisted his climb. Each trip up and down etched new knowledge in his mind and body. He became a master of futility, an artist of effort. Yet in these many years, a deeper shift was taking place, a change in the way Sisyphus understood the purpose of his suffering. The gods, it seemed, had not watched in some time, or perhaps they had simply grown bored. Day followed night, seasons changed in subtle ways, but never did Zeus thunder, nor did Hermes bring new commands. Sisyphus was truly alone, left to wrestle with himself, but he was not quite alone. For sometimes, in those spaces between sleep and waking, he heard faint voices, his wife's laughter, his son's advice, the melody of his daughter's singing. These moments stung him at first, then brought comfort, and eventually came to feel like a blessing. If he closed his eyes and leaned against the stone, he could almost hear his children's voices urging him on, just as he used to urge them to be brave. One day, an unexpected visitor shattered the routine. As Sisyphus drove his shoulder against the boulder, working up a sweat, lost in the struggle, a low growl echoed up the mountainside. He turned, startled. There, on the slope below, pacing the edge of the shadow, was a wolf. This was no ordinary animal. Shadows gathered around its paws, and its yellow eyes seemed wiser than any beast's. Sisyphus kept his distance, remembering tales of divine messengers who came in strange forms. "Go back," he called. "This mountain is cursed. No man or beast may rest here." But the wolf just circled him, silent, always watching. When Sisyphus attempted to return to pushing the boulder, the wolf howled. The sound was wild, but in it Sisyphus detected a kind of warning, almost like words spoken from a distance. "Why do you disturb my work?" Sisyphus asked, frustration rising. "What more can be taken from me?" The wolf only tilted its head, then, with a leap, bounded up the mountain, following the path Sisyphus took each day. The king hesitated. No creature, not even a spirit, had ever followed him along his cursed road. Leaving the boulder for the first time in years, his curiosity piqued. Sisyphus followed the wolf up the winding slope. The wolf moved gracefully over sand and stone, pausing at each ledge as though beckoning for Sisyphus to keep up. He did, scrambling not as a king, but as one desperate for meaning. The wolf finally stopped at a place near the summit, a narrow ridge Sisyphus rarely paused at, preferring to reach the peak as quickly as possible lest the boulder slip. Here the cloud sat low, and the wind was almost warm. With a sudden jerk of its head, the wolf stared directly into Sisyphus's eyes. In that gaze, Sisyphus saw flashes, a city burning, a young king crowned, a woman's tearful goodbye, the iron chains that once bound Thanatos, the defiant laughter that had brought him to the gods' notice. Every choice and consequence, every act of pride, and every echo of regret played out in the wolf's golden eyes. Sisyphus knelt, chest heaving. "Are you a judge? Do you come to weigh my soul as Hades would?" The wolf's form flickered, and in its place stood a woman robed in gray, her eyes kind yet searching, hair woven with silver leaves. Sisyphus gasped, recognizing her vaguely from ancient stories and temple carvings. "I am Nemesis," the woman said in a voice like flowing water, "the goddess of divine balance, she who brings justice for pride and hubris. You have feared the punishment, Sisyphus, but you have never truly weighed your own heart. Tell me, after all these years, what do you believe?" Sisyphus bowed his head, unsure how to answer. "I have struggled without victory. I have cursed the gods and myself. I have remembered too late the value of humility and kindness. My pride gave me strength, but in the end, it left me alone." Nemesis's eyes grew sad. "You were given a mind filled with genius and restless energy, but you used it only to outwit others, to take, to win for the sake of victory. You did not see that the gifts we give mortals are not for domination, but for connection and understanding. Do you see it now?" He nodded slowly. "I see, but I also see that my punishment is only changed, not lifted. I am still bound to this rock." Nemesis placed her hand on his shoulder, a gentle cooling weight. "It is so. The consequences of pride are not easily undone, but the heart that changes can be set free in its own way, by compassion, by wisdom, by letting go of what it should never have desired." "Tell me, Nemesis," Sisyphus whispered, "will my story ever end? Will I ever rest?" The goddess smiled, and something in her gaze comforted him. "Not every story ends with peace. Some must become warnings, shadows stretching across time so others can find light. You have learned much, Sisyphus, but you will always carry your burden. It remains to you to decide how you carry it." With that, she vanished. Sisyphus sank to his knees, gripped by a strange, fierce gratitude. He returned to his stone, but each time he began to roll it, he remembered her words. It remains to you to decide how you carry it. For the next 100 years, Sisyphus treated labor as something not imposed, but chosen. He experimented, changing his pace, finding joy in exertion, pausing to admire the dawn at each ascent. He spoke to other souls in the underworld, lost kings, ruined heroes, even old enemies. He listened without pride, learning their regrets, giving solace when he could. The weight of the stone never lessened, but his heart felt lighter. He taught himself that even a prisoner can be free in spirit. He noticed in moments of rest the subtle beauty of his world, the color of the sky at dusk, the rare, fragile flowers that bloomed in cracks between rocks, the sound of wind through the valleys. One day, as he pushed his stone and neared the summit, Sisyphus found a small bird perched on a boulder, singing a bright, simple tune. For an instant, its song seemed to shatter the silence of ages. Sisyphus smiled, pausing to listen. "You are free," he whispered, "though you dwell in a place of shadows." The bird cocked its head, then took flight, soaring high, higher than Sisyphus had ever climbed. For the first time, he dared to dream not of rest, but of the beauty to be found even in struggle. The years continued their slow march. Sisyphus became a legend among the shades, a figure of endurance, of humility, earned the hard way. Some came to him for counsel, others simply watched and learned. And Sisyphus, never a teacher in life, found happiness in sharing small wisdom, that pride is best softened by experience, kindness, and the willingness to accept what cannot be changed. Still, the stone rolled back each time. The lesson was never truly done. One day, as rain fell and the mountain surface gleamed, Sisyphus let the boulder rest just below the peak. He sat and watched the clouds. It struck him suddenly that above the mountaintop, far beyond the reach of punishment or hope, the sky remained as it was in life, vast, uncaring, beautiful. He spoke aloud, half to himself. "So this is eternity, not torment, but the chance to discover meaning again and again, in every effort, in every small kindness, even if no one is there to see it." The wind answered with a soft sigh, as if in approval. That night Sisyphus dreamed not of his city, or his glory, or even the gods, but of walking hand in hand with the shadows of those he had loved and lost. His wife, mentor, his children, along a green path under warm sunlight. They spoke of the past without regret, and Sisyphus awoke with new strength. He resolved each morning, as he struggled, not only to endure but to create stories, laughter, memories to share with those shades who gathered near. He became the heart of a strange, quiet community among the punished, an example of how even the most cursed can choose acceptance. One late afternoon, as twilight deepened, Sisyphus saw again the wolf. This time it did not warn or test, but simply walked at his side while he prepared for yet another climb. The wolf's eyes held wisdom and peace. Sisyphus bowed his head. "Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for reminding me that burdens do not end. They only become teachers when we are ready to hear them." The wolf licked his hand and then faded into the dusk. As another century turned, Sisyphus finally accepted that the greatest joy is not escape, but transformation. The mountain, the stone, his own heart, each was shaped, scarred, and changed by the relentless force of struggle. And as the stars wheeled overhead, Sisyphus smiled. He had found not the end to punishment, but the renewal of meaning in every task, however endless. He was, at last, at peace. As the ages advanced and buried themselves in one another, a curious transformation took root upon the mountain. What had once been a lonely hill of torment, known only to Sisyphus and his burden, became the site of curious gatherings and shared stories. For in the underworld, change moved slowly, but inevitably, and Sisyphus was destined to become more than a solitary figure. He became a beacon, a teacher to those whose sorrows echoed his own. Word spread through the shadowed valleys. The king who rolled the stone no longer cursed the gods or his fate, but carried his punishment with uncommon dignity. New arrivals to the land of the dead, burdened with regret and confusion, sought him out. At first, they watched in silence and awe. Then, one by one, they sat with him on the slopes when he rested. They listened to his stories, brought their own, and in those moments, the eternal gray of the underworld seemed not so cold. Among the first to join him was Danaus, a once proud king condemned for his betrayal by the gods. Danaus's own task was futile, to fill a vessel with holes with water from a distant pond, a punishment for endless deceit. He collapsed one day beside Sisyphus, exhausted and bitter. "Why do we bother?" Danaus grumbled, staring up at the mercilessly blank sky. "The gods are cruel. No amount of cleverness or humility can ease what they have set upon us. Does it not enrage you still?" Sisyphus studied the ex-king. There was a time he would have answered with anger or mockery. Now he simply nodded in sympathy. "Of course, at first. But I learned, slowly, painfully, that the anger only chained me tighter. When you accept the work not as a punishment but as an opportunity for understanding, the chains grow lighter." Danaus did not believe him, not at first. But he listened, and in time Sisyphus's steady effort and acceptance chipped away at Danaus's fury. As months passed, Danaus became Sisyphus's first companion. They worked side by side, sharing silence, hardship, and sometimes their hardest memories, each one a step toward what Sisyphus now knew as redemption. One day, as Sisyphus guided his boulder upward, Danaus paused at his side. "How did you bear the moment when you understood there would be no end? When you realized that pride itself could not shatter your chains?" Sisyphus wiped his brow, by seeing that every beginning is also an end, and every end a beginning. "I stopped struggling against the mountain and became part of it." Others joined in time, drawn by the legend. Tantalus, forever denied food and water, would sit at the foot of the slope after his own fruitless day and share tales of vanity and desire. There was Ixion, spinning eternally upon his burning wheel, who would call out advice and jokes as he passed by on the rare moments his path took him close. There were many more, each with a punishment, each with a reason, each gaining something from Sisyphus's calm endurance. These shades became a brotherhood, and a sisterhood too, though few women were given punishments so visible among these famous exiles. A community born of agony, a fellowship of those whose stories the living world remembered as warnings and the gods as failures. Every evening, after their tasks, they gathered where the wind softened and the sky bent a little toward dusk. Here Sisyphus took his place at the center, not by royal command, but by the quiet force of example. As their leader, he learned humility afresh, for never again did he presume himself above others. When newcomers joined the group, Sisyphus always listened more than he spoke. If they raged, he let them rage. If they mourned, he held his peace, offering a supportive shoulder. For many, this was the first kindness received in a very long time. One afternoon, after a long and especially arduous day of rolling, a new face arrived, a woman named Niobe. Her eyes were filled with immeasurable grief, for she had lost her children, and her pride had cost generations dear. She did not speak for almost a week, only sitting slightly apart, watching Sisyphus and the others as they labored. It was Danaus who approached her first, offering wordless comfort. But it was Sisyphus who, one gentle dusk, broke the silence. "Many here suffer, Niobe," he said. "Your pain is different, but you do not have to bear it alone." She stared, unsure how to answer, tears glinting in the failing light. Sisyphus did not press. He simply resumed his tale, telling her not of punishments, but of small joys he'd discovered in the centuries. The shape of a cloud, an unexpected rainbow after rain, the laughter of others among the endless hills. For the first time since her arrival, Niobe smiled, a faint, trembling smile. In this gesture, Sisyphus recognized the first spark of healing. As the years wound on, these evenings became their solace. They created rituals of storytelling, of remembering both their errors and the small kindnesses they found in one another. There were times of music, with Tantalus humming old melodies, times of poetry recited from shattered memories, times of silence that was not so lonely as before. Sisyphus found a new purpose with every shade who came seeking, no longer simply enduring, but guiding. He became a mentor not through orders or prideful tricks, but through patience, empathy, and sharing. He marveled at the change in himself. Once, he would have seen this as weakness or defeat. Now it felt like the truest kind of strength. Yet the boulder and the mountain remained. There were days when the climb felt impossibly hard, days when old anger returned or nightmares tormented him. But always when he faltered, one of his companions was there to help, to give a silent nod, a memory of hope, or sometimes to stand shoulder to shoulder with him as he pushed. If the gods watched, they gave no sign. But Sisyphus wondered more and more if divine punishment was not simply a lesson, and that perhaps true forgiveness came not from Zeus or Hades, but from one's own change of heart. It was during a rare, still night, when the stars seemed especially bright, that Sisyphus felt the presence of the divine more keenly than ever before. He had finished his daily climb. The boulder had just slipped once more from his hands, and he sat, exhausted, his friends resting nearby. The air flickered, chill and full of expectation. Sisyphus looked up to find Hermes standing at the summit above. The messenger god was changed, no longer mocking, but somber, almost gentle. "Sisyphus," Hermes called, his voice like wind through ancient trees. "You who were once the proudest of men, do you understand now why you failed?" Sisyphus climbed slowly up to where Hermes stood and met his gaze. "I failed because I thought myself above fate, above law, above compassion. I failed because I did not listen when I should have, nor cared when I could have." Hermes nodded. "Long have you labored, and in your toil, you have taught even those who deemed themselves beyond teaching. Your story has spread through the underworld and beyond. Do you ask now for release?" For the briefest moment, Sisyphus was tempted, yet looking down at his companions, he shook his head. "I do not ask for release. Not now. For I have found meaning even here, purpose among punishments, hope where there was once only despair. I ask only that those who come after me may find friendship, and the wisdom I have learned a little sooner than I did." Hermes smiled, the faintest hint of admiration in the gesture. "That is true humility, Sisyphus. It was never your mind that angered the gods, but your refusal to see that greatness includes kindness toward others and acceptance of one's own flaws." With those words, Hermes faded once again, leaving a strange warmth behind. From that point forward, Sisyphus's punishment did not lessen, but the burden felt forever changed. In time, he and his brotherhood of exiles turned their mountaintop into a place of gathering for all who sought understanding, redemption, or simply the comfort of shared struggle. There were days when Sisyphus thought he could almost see the outline of a new stone path winding up the mountain, a path not of punishment, but of possibility. Though the stone always rolled back, Sisyphus greeted it anew each morning, his hands steady, his heart at ease. His task was far from over, but now, at last, he saw that eternity itself could become what we make of it, a lesson in acceptance, kindness, and the slow, patient work of redemption. The mountain, the stone, and the brotherhood all were now and would ever be his world. And in every push upward, Sisyphus found not punishment, but purpose. A story that would be told long after the gods themselves faded into the dust of legend. Eternity gathers everything, even new souls. As years drifted by like slow ripples upon Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, Sisyphus's mountain, once a lonely yard for his pride and torment, had become something else entirely. A place where the lost and the broken came to find meaning in their pain. Through humility and kindness, Sisyphus had drawn spirits of hope among doomed souls, and their fellowship was a quiet rebellion against despair. But even as the mountain became a place of solace, new trials waited. One chill morning, as twilight still clung to the horizon, Niobe found Sisyphus beginning the slow, practiced push of his boulder. Her voice, while no longer trembling, still carried echoes of grief. "There is someone new below," she said. "He won't speak with us. He just sits and stares at his hands as if something worse than death has happened." Sisyphus paused. Moments like this reminded him how his own pain, once so pure and isolating, had become the road to helping others. "I will go," he replied. "I remember what it is like to wake up with only guilt for company." He left the path, descending to the valley where shadows shifted among gray olive trees. Sitting by a dried-up well was a young man, not much more than a boy, his head buried in his hands. Sisyphus knelt quietly, not wishing to startle him. "Greetings," he said softly. "I am Sisyphus. You may have heard stories, even lies, but those are just stories. Here, I am simply a companion." The boy did not look up. "It is my fault," he said. "I failed everyone. I was a coward." Sisyphus nodded, lowering himself to the cold earth. "We are all here for some reason, most for our pride. Tell me your name and your story only if you wish." The boy hesitated. "My name was Leandros. I did not stand with my friends against a tyrant. I just watched. Now, I don't know if I'm meant for punishment, only that I deserve it." For a while, Sisyphus said nothing. He remembered all the faces from his own past, those he had failed in his quest for control. When he spoke, his words were gentle. "Courage comes not from never fearing, but from choosing again and again to be better than we've been." "I can't," Leandros whispered. Sisyphus shook his head. "You can. Each day is new. Even here, in a world made of regret, we choose how to go on." He helped Leandros to his feet and led him slowly toward the mounting path, away from the barren well. They joined the others near the fire, where stories were sometimes shared, and at times simply warmth was enough. Leandros, like all the broken, took time to heal. He would often sit by Sisyphus as the stone was rolled upward. "Why try? The gods built this suffering without end." Sisyphus replied as he pressed up the hill. "The gods began it, but we choose what it makes of us. It once made me angry and proud. Now it makes me strive to be gentle and understanding." Leandros scoffed. "But the rock always wins." Sisyphus chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yes, but every moment pushing, every kind word to another soul, is a moment the gods did not expect. That is how mortals make meaning from what's given." The days grew into patterns. When Sisyphus rested, he watched Danaus help Leandros mend his pride. Niobe spoke softly with other lost women, weaving sorrow into song. Even Tantalus, who sometimes raged, would bring levity. In this new fellowship, Sisyphus saw a gathering of mirrors, each reflecting a mistake and each learning a little grace. The hardest trial came not from the gods this time, but from within. One night, as darkness blossomed with cold fire on the horizon, and Sisyphus was alone beside the boulder, Hermes appeared, not showily, but as a flickering shimmer that settled into familiar sandals and caduceus staff. "King of Corinth," Hermes intoned, "Zeus asks a question. If you could escape this fate with a single act of pride, a clever trick, or a boast, would you try it?" Sisyphus met the god's eyes. "In the old days, my answer would have been swift. I would have schemed and lied to find the crack in your offer. But I have learned that pride is its own prison, larger than this hill." Hermes raised a brow. "So you remain forever?" Sisyphus looked down, then smiled. "Freedom is not always leaving. Sometimes it is changing the meaning of your chains." He looked over the valley to the cluster of souls gathered like a small village, and his eyes filled with softness. "If I left, the lesson would be wasted, for me and for them." Hermes' grin this time was full and proud, not mocking. "Few are so wise, even among the gods." When the god vanished, Sisyphus was left with his thoughts. That night he saw in his dreams a vision of his former palace, torchlit, yet covered in creeping ivy, corridors forever empty. It was memory, but it was also warning. He had chased so hard after victories that he spent his whole life building walls, and in eternity had learned to take them down. Months passed. With each kind act and sound advice, Sisyphus became the leader of the damned and the comforter of the shamed. Yet he never let his position return him to arrogance. He remembered at every sunrise to walk the lowest valley and greet the newest arrivals as an equal. One cold evening, Niobe came and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You have become like Orpheus here, a healer of hearts." Sisyphus blinked, smiling slightly. Orpheus never escaped either. But perhaps this is why we both found new meaning here. Niobe shook her head. Orpheus sang to forget. You work and teach to remember. Word of Sisyphus's community grew even to the far banks of Lethe. Curious shades and even minor gods sometimes paused to observe. One day, a stranger arrived, an old man with a limp hunched over a crooked staff. His rags rustled in a sourceless wind. "I am Tiresias," the man said, "once a seer, now only a shade, but my eyes see still. I have wandered the underworld looking for something like this, a place where learning continues, where pride is tempered, where hope flickers." Sisyphus greeted the famed prophet warmly. "You are welcome. We all have our burdens. Do you wish to tell your story or listen to ours?" Tiresias settled by the fire. In time, all stories become one. "Tell me, Sisyphus, what would you say to mortals if they could hear?" Sisyphus pondered. "I would tell them to listen, especially to the voices of doubt and warning. I would tell them to love those close to them, for pride's victories are hollow when won alone. And I would say, never stop changing. Never stop opening your heart, even when pain seems endless." That night the fire burned bright, and even Tantalus's hunger seemed to ease as Tiresias spoke his own wisdom. Sisyphus listened, for even now, he knew learning never ends. One morning, when cold fog wrapped the slopes and the sound of weeping drifted up from the river Styx, Sisyphus recognized that the world above must be changing too. How many centuries have passed, he wondered aloud. Does anyone remember us, or are we only myths now? Danaus, rolling his leaky urn up a hill beside him, smiled sadly. Even if forgotten, every lesson we learn here shapes fate above, in small ways. Who knows what child may hear a tale and be kinder for it? For a long time these words stayed with Sisyphus, When the wind was right, he fancied that he could hear faint laughter, see a mustard flower bloom where none had been before. He began to hope, even in the dim lands, that the choices made by those condemned here might one day ripple through the living world, that a single act of humility or mercy could inspire someone above to choose the gentler path. Years stretched, but never grew dull. Sisyphus challenged his community to new games of thought, giving puzzles that had no winners, only wise questions. Once proud, now he delighted in being bested. See, he laughed when Niobe solved a riddle first. Even kings are sometimes fools. Leandros, once sunken in guilt, became a steadfast supporter, not just in words, but in action. He helped newer arrivals, sharing Sisyphus's message and reminding all that the journey from pride to humility was both endless and worth repeating. In Sisyphus's mind, a recurring vision flowered and changed. At first, it had been a mountain veiled in clouds, then a bleak path graven to dust by centuries of isolation. Now it became a valley where each stone rolled was not simply punishment, but a chance for others to witness endurance and share the effort. One black night, as the stars hid themselves, a thunderclap shook the mountain. The shades gathered close, fearful this was the gods' judgment, or the final collapse of their small hope. But when silence fell again, and the dawn was brighter than ever before, Sisyphus understood. Perhaps the gods, watching from Olympus or the shores of Lethe, had learned something too, that even divine power is lessened by pride, and that perhaps the greatest task is not punishment, but the allowance for change, growth, and, if not freedom, then community. By the fire that night, Sisyphus told the oldest story he knew, the one no god could change. We are each given burdens, but we decide together how to bear them. Pride can harden, suffering can destroy, but if we listen and work and forgive, we forge meaning. And in meaning we are, if only for an instant, free. The mountain was still there. The boulder waited every morning. Yet now Sisyphus's heart was alive with hope, and though he was not free in body, he was free in soul. A lesson for gods and mortals alike, echoing forever among the brotherhood of the lost. Seasons do not pass in the underworld as they do in the land of the living. Instead, the world of shades marks time by memories, by the coming of new souls, by unexplained moments of brightened darkness or sudden pauses in suffering. And so, as countless years gathered in layers atop Sisyphus's mountain, something remarkable began taking shape around him. Not only a community, but a culture and a legacy. There was, of course, always work. Each morning, Sisyphus would find the stone exactly where he'd last left it at the mountain's foot. Each evening, he would sit with his companions, sometimes in quiet reflection, sometimes in laughter. But now, between the effort and the rest, he watched the gradual blossoming of something new. Stories told with pride surrendered, lessons sung in gentle voices, songs and laughter that could only exist where pain had been shared and transformed. Yet Sisyphus knew that every transformation brought its own testing. Even the kindest king can feel old wounds tear open, especially when comfort and hope turn routine. It was in the long, slow afternoons, those rare, easy times when the mountain seemed to welcome the struggle, that Sisyphus felt it most profoundly. Old pride would trickle in, whispering, "You built this. You made despair into peace. Without you, this mountain would still be a prison. Aren't you special? Aren't you above the others now?" He recognized these thoughts, bitter and well-practiced. For a while he would ignore them, focusing on the present, on a new riddle with Danaus or the way Niobe's singing quieted the wind. But pride, like the boulder, could be set aside only so long before returning. One dusk, as Sisyphus sat atop the crest after another failed ascent, the sky above shimmered strangely, colors like faded banners and flares of silver between shadows. He was not alone that dusk. Alexa, a shade new to the mountain, approached him. She was once a queen, proud and beautiful, punished for cruelty more subtle than most, a lifetime of turning away from those in need. "I see you feel the weight tonight," Alexa began, voice half uncertain, half bold. Sisyphus nodded. "Some stones are heavier when we think we are above having to bear them." She hesitated. "Do you ever wish you had ignored the others and simply focused on your own survival, on doing just what was needed to get through your punishment?" The question puzzled him. "Why?" She looked away, her eyes lost in the swirling sky. "Helping others," it sometimes feels as though it makes us forget our own pain. Is that weakness? If the gods left us alone, would we not be forced to become strong again, utterly alone? Sisyphus realized, to his surprise, that he did not have the old answer ready. Once he would have spoken quickly, with confidence. Now he paused. "Strength is not isolation, Alexa. Strength is knowing when we need others and when we can give to them. The gods punished us because of pride, but the gods may never forgive. The only real forgiveness is among ourselves." Alexa sighed, not arguing, but not yet convinced. Sisyphus saw himself in her, that old, unwelcome reflection. That night, after the usual fireside stories, Sisyphus left the warmth of his friends and walked alone along the dark slope. He was troubled, wondering if everything he had built could so easily be undone by another's pride, or his own. He climbed high, close enough to where the air thinned and the wind bit, and there he stopped. The sky seemed closer, and he felt for the first time in years deeply alone. As he waited for the dawn, some sign from the gods or from his own heart, he heard footsteps. Turning, he saw Leandros, his young friend, ascending the path below despite the darkness. The boy moved with calm and purpose, not the terror or guilt of his early days in the underworld. "I saw you leaving the fire," Leandros said. "Are you running from something?" Sisyphus folded his arms, perhaps from myself, or perhaps from the feeling that after all this time, my pride is not as dead as I wished it. Leandros sat on a nearby stone. "You once told me that healing is slow and that forgiveness is both a gift and a burden. Why are you less gentle with yourself than with others, Sisyphus?" He looked at Leandros, stung by the question. "Because I know the damage I once did, and because, even now, I can feel pride creeping in. The urge to believe I've become something more than the other punished souls. That urge, it frightens me. If I listen to it, even for a day, everything I've learned could be lost." Leandros studied him, then spoke quietly. "You taught me that wisdom is not the absence of weakness, but the will to face it openly. What if your pride is not a curse anymore, but a warning, a reminder to stay humble? Let it be your test, not your downfall." For a long while, Sisyphus sat quietly, letting the words settle. Maybe the hardest test was not climbing mountains or rolling stones, but continuing to change, to forgive himself daily, never settling into self-righteousness. The struggle wasn't just against the gods, but against the part of himself that always wanted to be above, apart, victorious at all costs. When the morning came, Sisyphus and Leandros descended together side by side. At the base, Alexa waited, her eyes less troubled than the night before. "Will you help me roll my stone today?" she asked, her voice a bit softer. He smiled. "I will." And so a new ritual began. Each day, after his own toil, Sisyphus found time to aid someone else, sometimes Alexa, sometimes those most weary or alone. He learned again that kindness flourished when it became habit, that pride lost its sting in the presence of shared effort. The camp of companions, once just a refuge, evolved. Its edge was now a school for the newly condemned, and Sisyphus became known gently and with a smile as the teacher of stones. One moonless night, Danos challenged Sisyphus to a contest. "We shall each share our most shameful moment," he declared, "and the others will judge none of it. Instead, each of us will try to tell what lesson it brought." The first time, Sisyphus resisted. It was not pride, he told himself, but dread of returning to that moment that defined his fall. But then he saw Alexa, Leandros, and Tantalus waiting. He stood, breathing deep. "My greatest shame was not that I cheated death, or that I betrayed the gods, but that I let my cleverness divide me from those I loved. I kept my wife at arm's length. I mocked Mentor's advice. In the end, my city loved the king, but few truly loved the man." His words trembled, but then he steadied. "What I learned is this: wisdom is only wisdom if it is shared with warmth. Isolation is not strength, and true victory is admitting when we are wrong." One by one, the others offered their stories, some through tears, some with laughter. With every confession, the circle grew tighter. Even those haunted by the worst misdeeds felt a small easing of burden. Shame and pride transformed, if only a bit, into understanding. Word of these circles floated on the smoky air to other condemned hillsides, and soon small groups formed their own rituals of honesty and kindness. Danos joked, "One day, there will be no one left in the underworld who knows only misery. We will all be too busy sharing and forgiving." Even the gods could not ignore the change forever. Stories drifted up to Olympus, brought by curious lesser spirits and wandering fates. Once it was Hermes who arrived, silent and observant. Another time it was Nemesis, veiled in shimmering gray, standing quietly at the edge of the fire during story hour. Neither interfered. They simply watched as even the most wretched souls found purpose through repentance and understanding. One misty dawn, Niobe approached Sisyphus as he sat gazing out across the endless plain. "Do you believe the gods ever regret their punishments?" she asked. Sisyphus thought, then shook his head. "I think the gods are not as we are. Repentance is not in their nature. But perhaps what we do here teaches them too, in ways they cannot admit." She sat beside him. In the old stories, gods were ruled by pride as we were. Maybe they watch our struggle because in some way they hope to change as well, though it takes them far longer. Sisyphus smiled. "If so, then there is hope for every soul." Another day, as Sisyphus lingered near the edge of the Lethe, watching ripples play in the black water, a group of old rivals arrived at the mountain. These were men and women who had opposed him during his reign, cheated by him, scorned, sometimes even exiled or ruined by his policies. Their presence was a challenge he could not avoid. They found him where the olive trees met the rocky slope. For a moment, awkward silence stretched. Then, one by one, they told him their old wounds, not as accusations, but as things that still stung and shaped them. Sisyphus listened in humility. "I was wrong," he told them. "Pride blinded me to the pain I caused you. I cannot undo it. But if you have found meaning here, and if my work lightens your suffering even a little, I am grateful." Some embraced him. Others watched, solemn but forgave. One old rival shed tears. Forgiveness, it seemed, freeing them both. From then on, the community flourished as never before. What had started as a place of punishment had become somewhere hope lived, boldly, even defiantly. Sisyphus was not just the king who bore his rock, he was the weaver of a tapestry of redemption. His old pride a thread no longer cruel but strong, linking every heart to every other. On the rarest nights, when he stood alone atop his mountain and the wind whispered through the stones, Sisyphus would ask the darkness, "Is this perhaps a kind of grace?" Silence usually answered, but sometimes, just sometimes, he heard the laughter of his wife, mentors' wise words, the distant chorus of companions and friends, and he knew in that quiet eternity that forgiveness of self, of others, even perhaps of fate itself, was the hardest gift, but the only one worth giving again and again, for as long as any heart remembers. Long had the underworld been a place of silence, broken only by the sorrows of the dead and the cackling voices of the Furies. But now even the lost winds carried new stories from Sisyphus's hill. In the growing fellowship of the damned, there stirred not only the seeds of comfort, but whispers of transformation. For in their endless punishments, something luminous and unexpected had begun to take root. The change was slow, easy to miss at first. But as the eons flowed, the once isolated souls began working together more often than not, sharing burdens when boulders slipped, returning for a suffering neighbor, or listening quietly to one tormented by memory. Resentment and pride did not vanish. They rose with the morning fog and tried, as always, to wedge themselves back into the hearts of the weary. Yet the difference now was that the souls saw these feelings, understood them, and however haltingly, forgave them. This change was not lost on the gods of Olympus. There were rumors among the spirits who flitted between the worlds that Sisyphus had made the underworld less terrible. Some said that the gods, in their cloud-cast halls, became curious, perhaps even troubled, by the growing strength of compassion below. One evening, as his boulder rested for only moments between climbs, Sisyphus was visited not by shade or god, but by Thanatos. The death god approached with a dignity that seemed less icy than before. His voice echoed from the heart of shadows. "Sisyphus, you have become what you once despised, a comforter, not a trickster. Does this not feel like another sort of defeat?" Sisyphus smiled, sensing that Thanatos appreciated the irony. "No, old friend, if defeat is learning kindness after lifetimes of pride, I accept it. Won't you rest with us for a while, share our food and laughter?" Thanatos refused the food. Death needs nothing, but he stayed for the stories. This was the first of many small signs that even the gods and the ancient forces could not entirely ignore the lessons blossoming in the dark. The community's rituals deepened. Where once Sisyphus had been alone in punishment, now he learned not just to teach, but also to learn anew. Danos's urn was no longer a sign only of futility. It became a source of challenge, as Danos invited others to help mend it or invent techniques for carrying water without hope of success. Niobe's songs, born in grief, became lullabies that soothed the entire underworld, and even Tantalus found that shared laughter sometimes dulled his hunger. Every day, as the shades gathered around their fire, new arrivals told their stories, often trembling with shame. Each time Sisyphus would offer the same refrain: "What we did is not all we are. In these hills, we become what we choose, day by day." But Sisyphus, for all his wisdom, knew that struggle was never banished completely. That was the way of eternity. There were days when the old bitterness crept in, days when an argument would flare, or the longing for pardon from the gods would gnaw at the soul. Leandros, once so cowed, now led by example, reminding the group that forgiveness was not a door, but a path, walked anew each day. If we cannot forgive ourselves for every mistake, he would say, then we must at least forgive ourselves if we forget, and wake ready to try again. Small acts rippled outward. Other cursed souls, Ixion, Tityos, the daughters of Danaus, began new circles of their own, and the tradition spread. Fires lit where none had burned in centuries. Furies who came to torment the condemned paused in confusion, finding their threats blunted by shared endurance and the gentle laughter of the lost. One day, even Hermes returned, smiling lightly, out of the mists and shadows. You have done what none thought possible, Sisyphus. You have created hope where none was decreed. Sisyphus bowed. Hope is as stubborn as the mountain, Hermes. It grows even in stone. The rumor of these changes crept up Mount Olympus and became the subject of debate. Hera, chief among the gods, scowled at the news. They were sent for punishment, not comfort. Athena, ever wiser, mused, perhaps mortals learn in a way even gods cannot. Perhaps we offer them no victory, but they find victory in changing each other. Ares scoffed at their gentleness, while Demeter watched with secret pride as souls practiced the healing of the spirit. Even Zeus, mighty and often unmoved, heard the stories and grew curious. Perhaps in the deepest core of the king of gods was a faint envy of the resilience mortals showed, an ability to wring meaning out of suffering, never giving up. On a day that dawned with rare golden haze over the hills, Sisyphus became aware that something in him was changing too. His heart, so long weary, felt suddenly open, not fragile, but full. Was it pride, or was it gratitude? As he paused with his boulder, the mountain stretching far below, his old life rushed over him. The face of his wife, the laughter of Mentor, the city he once ruled with such cunning. In his mind, they no longer accused nor wept for him. They encouraged him. Standing at the summit, Sisyphus turned to the gathered souls. They had all sensed the moment's weight. I thank you, he said, voice strong, for each day that you forgive one another, that you forgive me, that you help me forgive myself. Even the mountains seemed to listen. They created new legends then, not of punishment, but of what could be built from the ruins of pride. When new arrivals came, Sisyphus would meet them at the foot of the hill. He would offer a hand and say, "Welcome. You are not only your mistakes. Here, we learn again." There were days when forgiveness seemed easy, and there were days of mourning or relapse into anger, especially when God sent reminders of their power. On one such day, lightning cracked the sky above the camp, and voices thundered down, an echo of Zeus's ancient fury. Are you to make a mockery of justice with your little fires? Is eternity not long enough to break you? Sisyphus bowed his head, then raised it. Eternity means nothing if it does not teach. You may hold us here, but the heart grows even in chains. If this is mockery, then it is the kind the world needs, hope biting at the heel of despair. Zeus's thunder rolled, then faded. Silence returned, and with it, a sense of deep accomplishment, a quiet victory that the gods could not steal. After that day, the mountain's legend was told not only among the dead, but also faintly in the dreams of mortals. Children on earth heard faint whispers of the king who never gave up, Young lovers told tales beside fires of misery, overcome by kindness. Sisyphus realized his story, once a warning, was slowly becoming a beacon, a myth to shape the future. There came, inevitably, old doubts. There were nights Sisyphus wondered if all this hope was simply another mask, another clever trick, his pride lingering in the form of helpfulness and community instead of dominance. But each night, as he lay near the fire, he listened to the voices of his friends, the laughter, the small dramas and reconciliations, and he recognized humility, helplessness, gratitude, all feelings impossible to fake. His pride, he realized, had become not a mountain, but a stepping stone to something vast and compassionate. New opportunities to learn arrived with every soul. A once abusive ruler who, in life, had never bent a knee now worked for years before accepting aid. When finally he did and broke his silence before the fire's warmth, the effect was like a stone cast into Lethe, ripples spreading wide, forgiveness passing from one hand to another in rapid succession. One day, even Tantalus, whose suffering remained the cruelest, forever thirsting in sight of water, allowed himself to lead a session of stories by the fire. He spoke not of blame nor shame, but asked softly, "What, if anything, would you do again if you could live again?" The stories were bittersweet, filled with longing, honesty, and the slow realization that to wish for another past is not wrong, but it changes nothing if you do not accept who you have been. In these shared admissions, old wounds became new energy. The community was never finished, but always growing. It was during this time that Sisyphus faced perhaps his greatest challenge. A shade arrived, quiet, watchful, clearly one of the old city guards who had once tried to betray him. The man would not approach the fire, nor speak to anyone unless alone. Sisyphus recognized him, and for a moment felt his old pride and bitterness swell. He remembered cruel words, a plotted ambush, the terror for his family in Corinth. He approached the man one evening. "You know who I am," Sisyphus said quietly. "You may hate me for my pride, but we are both prisoners here. Tell me your story, or let us work together in silence." The man would not answer at first, but Sisyphus, remembering the gift Leandros and Niobe had brought him, patience and trust, waited through many days of awkward labor. At last, on a night when mournful winds swept the hill, the guard came to him. "I was afraid," he confessed. "I let others convince me that betraying you was the only way to save my own life. I failed. I failed you, and my own spirit." Silence. "Do you forgive me, King?" Sisyphus nodded. "We are all afraid sometimes. I forgive you. Can you forgive yourself?" The man wept then, something so rare and startling it drew eyes from across the fire. Others joined, and in that embrace, Sisyphus learned that the greatest ripples of all were not cast by punishment, but by mercy. That night, as Sisyphus rolled his boulder, his hands worn but steady, he laughed aloud, something almost joyful, ringing in the underworld's cool air. Later, as he rested, Niobe came to him, a question in her eyes. "Do you ever wish to see the upper world again?" He considered, feeling the peace inside him surpassing longing. "If I ever return, it would only be to bring these lessons with me. That pride is a mountain alone, but humility and forgiveness are the road down, or perhaps the key to turning even the harshest fate into a kind of freedom." Around the fires of the underworld, the legend of Sisyphus endured not as a tale of punishment, but as the tale of a man who turned suffering into wisdom, pride into community, and despair into the echoing laughter of souls forever growing. And so, as the stone rolled endlessly beneath his hands, the king found that even an eternity could be changed, one act of forgiveness at a time. A cold hush wrapped the slopes of Sisyphus's mountain in the underworld. With every cycle, every roll of the boulder, the world below the earth seemed to grow more alive in its odd fashion. Stories, laughter, struggle, and above all the daily communal work against regret and loneliness. But the wheel of eternity is never still, and fate had one more visitor to send, more unexpected and mysterious than any shade or god so far. It was on a morning heavy with fog that the surface of the river Lethe shimmered. Through its mist, a boat slowly materialized, its sides carved with symbols Sisyphus had not seen since the living days when the oracle ruled Delphi and kings begged answers from the gods. Old Charon himself ferried the boat, his face as creased as ancient tree bark, his silence deeper than the river's heart. Sisyphus and his companions gathered by the riverbank, curiosity in every eye. Charon's rare arrival never passed without significance. From the boat stepped a young woman, hooded and veiled, bearing with her an energy that felt out of place even among the strange folk of the underworld. When she pulled back her hood, Sisyphus felt his knees wobble. She bore a resemblance to his wife as she'd once been, though her eyes were ageless and wise. "I am Cleo," she declared, "a keeper of stories and a watcher of mortal memory. The gods have sent me, but I come not only as their messenger, nor as judge. I bring news from the world above." Her voice was melodic, seeming to resurrect distant temple songs. Before Sisyphus could reply, the souls drew back to let her approach him. She moved lightly, every motion careful and filled with years beyond her appearance. "I bring you word, Sisyphus, not of your city, for generations have come and gone, but of the shape your story takes in the world above. And I bring you a question." Sisyphus drew a deep breath, surprise and anxiety vying in his chest. "Tell me, what has become of Corinth, and what question does a keeper of stories wish to ask a condemned king?" Cleo regarded him for a long moment, her gaze settling like gentle rain. "Your name survives, Sisyphus. It is told as a warning and as an inspiration. Parents chasten their stubborn children with tales of your pride, but philosophers and poets whisper about your tireless struggle. Some see you as the ultimate rebel, others as the finest fool. What do you wish your legacy to truly be?" Sisyphus was silent, lost in memories, his city of marble and laughter, towers shining in the dawn, and then the long shadow that pride had cast over it all. When he could finally answer, his voice was low and thoughtful. "I wish to be remembered not simply for pride or rebellion, but for finally learning that there is more strength in compassion and humility than in any scheme or cleverness. That my story, if it must be a warning, may at least stand as proof that change is always possible." The souls around him listened with reverence. Cleo nodded. "That is an answer wise enough for gods, rare among mortals." Then she sat beside him, queen and keeper, story to story. "Will you tell me what you've learned here in your eternity?" He began, slowly at first, then with growing conviction. He spoke of his old arrogance, the punishments, the game's endless rules, and he described the gradual thaw, the friendships that rescued him from loneliness, and the rituals of forgiveness they'd built within the underworld's gloom. He shared the quiet miracles, the first time Tantalus laughed, Niobe's song, how Danaus, who once cursed every dawn, began to bless them instead. Cleo listened, enraptured, her quill scribbling in a silver-bound book. And do the others forgive you now? Your rivals, your friends, and even yourself? Sisyphus swallowed. I hope so. I have asked forgiveness every way I know how. Sometimes it is granted, sometimes it is a lesson that must be learned again each day. But slowly I have found that forgiveness, far from being the end of punishment, is the beginning of freedom here. Danaus nearby added, each time the story is retold, a little more hope enters the world above and below. At the fire that night, Cleo took her turn telling stories, not of gods or punishments, but of simple villagers atop the world, inventing new feasts, singing small songs, reaching out to one another. The world turns colder and brighter, Sisyphus. Sometimes they remember you in festivals. Children giggle about rocks and kings. Sometimes they gather in groups, helping each other carry burdens as you do here. Your struggle is no longer only yours. Leandros, now an accepted member of their circle, asked, if the world hears us, why do we still labor? Why do the gods not simply let us go? Cleo shrugged with a gentle smile. Perhaps there is a need for endless stories, for warnings that are neither bitter nor hopeless. Perhaps, too, the gods learn from watching how mortals face what cannot be changed. After she left, her boat gliding silently back across Lethe, the mountain seemed to glow with a quiet pride, not the kind that isolates, but the kind that knits people together. Sisyphus spoke quietly to Leandros and Niobe. If we suffer that others may build new worlds, the pain is not wasted. But suffering never vanishes completely. Sometimes, on clear nights, Sisyphus's old dreams returned. He saw the halls of Olympus, gods laughing at his stubbornness, and his stone rolling away, mocking all effort. In these dreams, he would wake aching, ancient fears crawling up from the depths. What if none of this matters? What if the gods are only amused by our struggle? He confided in Mentor's ghost at sunset when furies and doubts were at their strongest. How do you keep believing? Sisyphus asked. What if I am only passing pride from one form to another? Mentor answered, as he always had, quietly and simply. You believe by choosing. Every day you act with care and humility. You prove pride is not all there is. Even when you fail, you teach others to rise after failure. The gods may not end your struggle, but they cannot take meaning from it unless you abandon hope. Sisyphus took these words to heart, and as days turned to centuries, he became what mortals above now called him, a symbol not of despair, but of relentless striving, of hope in the heart of hardship. The community's new tradition was the Festival of Stones, a day when labor was suspended and every tale was told around the main fire. The stories wove together, tales of pride lost, love remembered, lessons learned and shared. That evening, Tantalus recited a poem, Niobe sang, and Danaus told the story of the water that could not be contained, likening it to wisdom. It leaks out, but always finds a way to nourish the roots below. On the edge of firelight, new faces joined each year. More souls, some terrified, some angry, some numb with loss. Sisyphus became a mentor in the truest sense. The old rituals, the riddles, the confessions, the wordless listening, shaped and steadied all who came, making hope possible even for those certain it would never return. It was during one such festival that Sisyphus realized the burden of leadership could be its own kind of pride. He was not the only one who could teach. During a long night storm of memories and laughter, he handed the mantle of storytelling to Niobe, and she carried the circle with grace. Later, Sisyphus asked her, "Do you think this work will ever end?" Niobe smiled, eyes shining with both tears and joy. "Perhaps not, but it does not matter if it ends. What matters is how we do it and who we become along the way." In the months and years that followed, Sisyphus learned to step back as well as step forward, to guide without commanding, to let others, and especially younger souls, discover their own voices. Alexa, now filled with her own gentle wisdom, organized days of rest and music. Leandros invented new games, not of trickery, but of shared effort, racing to see whose laughter could echo the longest. The stories Sisyphus had heard from Cleo took on new life. Sometimes, as he lay in the grass atop the hill, he thought he could feel the faint sense of songs sung above ground. Children's hands joined as they pulled a heavy stone for play, always laughing. Sisyphus, Sisyphus, not as curse, but as hero. One morning, shades gathered in silence, watching the sunrise. For a rare moment, Sisyphus felt the weight of his rock grow less, the work easier. He realized then that the greatest change was not what the gods saw, nor even what the living told. It was within, an inner echo of the lesson learned. The boulder was the world, the road was effort, and the hope was that meaning would always be made new. Even as doubts sometimes returned, he remembered Cleo's story of the living world, how hope and struggle pass from mind to mind, never dying as long as someone tells the tale or forgives a failing. And so each day, as the camp flourished and new rituals developed, Sisyphus became at peace with his purpose. Punishment became partnership, pride became patience, and every shadow found a place beside the fire. He continued to climb, and each stumble, each moment of struggle was now a lesson shared openly, a mirror for all who watched. He was king no longer, but a father, a friend, a legend remade by failure and forgiveness. At the highest peak, where the wind met silence, Sisyphus whispered his only prayer. "Let our pain nourish the world's hope, and may every heart here or above discover that the mountain is only unending if we refuse to climb together." And in that echo, the story went on, never ending, always new. Ages rolled on, as they do in places where time is a river with no end, and every stone remembers its journey. Sisyphus's mountain stood unchanged in silhouette, but beneath its gray shadows, everything had shifted. Where once desolation was law, there was now the warmth of countless fires, and where silence had reigned, there bubbled up tales, laughter, even hope. Sisyphus rose each dawn, as he always had. He pressed his shoulder to the stone and began the long, familiar climb. The work did not ease, and the pain had never fully left his bones, but his purpose no longer wavered. He saw himself reflected in the faces that gathered nearby, Niobe with her music, Danaus with his mended urns, Leandros with his quiet faith, Alexa in her gentle kindness, and so many others whose stories had intertwined with his. Each one, once broken by pride or regret, now shone with the tough brilliance of new self-understanding. One evening, as the wind curled cool through the groves and the mountain shadow reached farther than ever, a strange hush fell across the encampment. Fires dimmed, even the restless furies stilled their accusations. From the mists beyond, a light brighter than memory flared, and into the circle walked the gods themselves. They came in all their splendor and terror. Zeus, white-bearded and unblinking, Hera, dignified and proud, Athena, eyes piercing as truth, Dionysus, grinning with wisdom and mischief, Apollo and Artemis and the rest. each brilliant and daunting in their aspect. Sisyphus held his place, neither kneeling nor boasting. He thought of the first time he defied the immortals, and of how far he had come in every sense since those days. Zeus spoke, his voice a storm that could split mountains. So, Sisyphus, mortal, trickster, king, teacher, what have you forged here in our domain? Sisyphus glanced around at the souls who drew close, hearts pounding. He bowed, not in shame but respect. I have forged nothing alone. Together we have turned punishment into purpose and suffering into meaning. We have learned and taught the lesson your judgment demanded, but in ways you did not foresee. Athena, with a wry smile, spoke next. Humility is the rarest jewel for mortals and gods alike. You have found it in the endless climb. Tell us, Sisyphus, do you still resent your fate? The question made Sisyphus pause. Once, resentment was his daily bread. Now he realized it was something gone lost beneath layers of acceptance and growth. I do not resent, not any longer. I wished for freedom, but learned instead that the greatest freedom is found in the meaning we bring to our labors and the care we show to those who walk beside us. Hera surveyed the changed mountain. You turn our designs to your own. Are you not still proud? He nodded. I am proud, proud of my friends, proud of the hope we built together. But that pride no longer demands worship or victory. It seeks only connection, healing, and understanding. Some of the gods frowned, as if frustrated by how mortal endurance had produced a wisdom even they found challenging. But others showed something like satisfaction or envy. Dionysus laughed, a sound like running wine. What now, king of stones? If this rock finally held at the summit, if the chain broke or our sentence lifted, would you leave? Sisyphus breathed deeply. The thought called to something old in him, a yearning for sunlight, olive groves, his lost city. But deeper now was another call, the need to be, to serve, to stand as a witness. I would visit the world perhaps to see what has become of my story. But I would return here because eternity is not an exile if it has purpose. Where there is pain, there is a need for those who remember pain's lessons. The gods murmured among themselves. Zeus thundered, we could end it now. We could erase your memory, break your circle, scatter your companions to Lethe. What would you do if we destroyed all this? Sisyphus did not look away. Then I would begin again, from nothing if need be, and I would teach whoever came, as long as I could still draw breath, that even in the worst darkness, we find one another and ourselves. The shades behind Sisyphus stood taller, emboldened. We too would begin again, said Danaus. We are more than our punishments. At this, a subtle shift passed through the gods. It was Athena who raised her hand, signaling for quiet. Perhaps we too must learn. If pride can be healed, it is through stories such as yours. Your punishment stays, Sisyphus, but your work is not for nothing. It is a gift, as well as a trial. Hera, not to be outdone, intoned, so let hope remain as your fire, and let your story reach every newcomer to this land. May your boulder never rest, but let its weight be matched by meaning. Zeus, with something almost gentle in his thunder, said, you are, and always will be, Sisyphus. And as the gods vanished into the mist, leaving flickers of lightning and dreams of resolution, Sisyphus and his community felt the truth in their bones. The task remained. The climb was endless, but the shape of their eternity was different now, blessed by acceptance, forged by courage, made sacred by humility. That night, the The celebration around the main fire was the greatest in living memory of the dead. Niobe sang ballads of forgiveness. Danaus told tales of hope hidden in failure. And Leandros, with new courage, spoke to each arrival with patience and faith. Cleo, the story keeper, reappeared and etched these events in her immortal scrolls, promising they would shape the myths above for ages. As dawn painted the stone with rose and gold, Sisyphus sat alone atop the highest ledge, his boulder momentarily still. He watched the shadows move. He felt the memory of every climb, every stumble, every regained hope. Mentor's shade found him, silent. "For what it's worth," Mentor said softly, "I always hoped you'd find this peace." Sisyphus smiled through old pain. It was the longest road, but now I see the rock, the mountain, the effort again and again. These are not just punishments. They are reminders of what pride once cost me, of what humility builds, and of all the voices joined to mine. Mentor looked skyward, where the memory of gods hovered. Is it enough? Sisyphus drew in the new morning, hope swelling in him. It is enough, Mentor, and it must always be enough, because the lesson never ends. Not for me, my friends, or the world above. Below, the community thrived. Alexa taught children's games with the lightness she'd denied herself in life. Leandros and Niobe, once lost, now led others to their own moments of grace. Even Tantalus, in rare flashes of peace, told those tormented by endless hunger that their suffering shared could create strange beauty. The boulder rolled, fell, and was pushed again. Sometimes Sisyphus sang as he worked. Sometimes he shared silence with those who walked beside him. And always, at the circle of fire, the story grew, adding new names, new burdens, new reasons to endure. Through it all, the mountain was unchanged and wholly changed. Every stone, the echo of forgiveness, every shadow stretched by hope, every flame a spark of the lesson given from one soul to the next. The rumor spread even to the furthest reaches of the underworld. If you must labor, labor in love. If you must endure, endure with others. If you falter, rise with their help and try again. Let your pride become not a wall, but a bridge. Once a king, once a trickster, once lost to endless pride, now Sisyphus was, in the eyes of those joined to his fate, a guide beyond kingship, a figure of humility who had turned the harshest sentence into a new way of living forever. On Olympus, the gods watched. In these mortals, they saw their own reflections, not in power, but in learning. And somewhere, in a deep quiet seldom known to immortals, they wondered what kind of eternity they might shape for themselves, if only they too learned what Sisyphus had learned, that in the end, it is not the mountain nor the stone which define us, but the love and meaning we create in every struggle, and the hope we leave in our wake. And so, the legend grew, rolling on like Sisyphus's stone, never ending, always new, a blessing disguised as punishment for all whose hearts still struggle and still hope.